Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Craft and Business of Books with me, Tetyana Denford.
And I'm Marissa Hussey.
So Marissa and I are trying to give you guys the tools, the tricks, the tips, and the stumbling blocks to the writing process, but also we're trying to shine a light on the never before kind of seen stuff from the industry side, process-driven author stuff, and everything in between. So we're trying to give everyone basically the information that you need to get your book on a shelf, because sometimes the book world can be really intimidating, and we're trying to make it less scary. Remember that we are on every Friday. Today is a live show. We're on at 2 p.m. Eastern, so make sure to click to subscribe below and to be alerted ahead of every broadcast. And also, please do leave questions and comments, especially when we have guests. That way we can cover it in the episode. So what are we talking about today? I'm thrilled.
Ooh, today we are talking about what happens when you write a book and it goes big, huge, like as a movie made starring Nicole Kidman and Colin Firth, huge. He is Mark Darcy. So
it's, and I mean, it's the dream, right? Isn't it? So you think, you never write a book with that in mind, ever. You write what you love, but then when it hits a chord, like when it makes such an impact, and strikes agents, publicists, everybody, readers and stuff the right way, it's just amazing, isn't it? I mean, suddenly you get an agent, and then there's a bidding war, and then you suddenly sell rights to the movie, and it's just, to me, that's mind-boggling, because still at the core of it, you're just a writer. You're just the person that just says, okay, well, I just wanted to write something that I really like, that I wanted to read, and I was hoping everybody else is reading it, but now I'm selling millions of copies. So yeah, it's nuts.
Yeah, and up to this point, of course, in the show, we've been talking about the very practical side of publishing, and I keep urging people, of course, to temper their expectations, and I keep stressing the importance of being a realist and knowing where your work is going to hit, so. Now we're going to blow that up, and I can't wait to hear from our guest today about what his experience was like. Did he subscribe to that kind of approach? Or did he go into it all knowing that this was, that he really had something special? While I have worked on books that have taken this path, right, that our guest's debut novel did, I am not, much to my own dismay, a best-selling author who has had a movie made from my work. So I will not deign to speak any further on this, and instead I will hand it right over to you to introduce our esteemed guest.
Well, our guest author is the cool S.J. Watson. And I say this because he's going to be so embarrassed, but he's not only a writer, he's also a photographer. And I love how he sees the world. But most importantly, for me as a writer, he is extremely generous with the writing community and his process, and he's constantly being inclusive on social media and engaging in conversations with people. And I think from that perspective, it really teaches you a lot. It teaches you about the person behind the book. It's not just, you can't, you see a face on the back of the book and you think, okay, well, wow, that's amazing. But you can't connect the two. And suddenly, having these conversations creates more of a transparency that he has been doing for a long time. And I think that's really wonderful. So yeah, so let's bring him on. Hello.
Is she trying to embarrass me?
Yes.
It's good to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to awkwardly introduce you while you watch.
Yeah.
So, Steve, your first novel, Before I Go to Sleep, was published in 2011. Right, it was a Sunday Times and New York Times bestseller. Sold in 43 territories. I think it was the Crime Writers Association Best Debut Novel and National Book Awards Crime Thriller of the Year. And from what the internet tells me, there are 6 million copies of it out there in the world, which is nothing to sniff at. So, your second book, Second Life, came out in 2014, and your most recent, Final Cut, is coming out in a few weeks.
Thank you.
Firstly, thank you. This is wonderful that you can be here with us and we can chat about everything and anything. So I'll start with the first the most important question for us is what you're working on now. It's like maybe specifically since lockdown happened. What have you been working on?
Well, it's quite interesting. I mean, right now, I think I'm spending most of my time sort of preparing for the publication of the new book. You know, there's a lot to do. You know, my to-do list grows ever longer by the day. But at the same time, I'm also trying to work on a new book because, you know, obviously it would have been far better all round if the virus had never happened and lockdown wasn't a thing and we were all, you know, free of that. But actually, in terms of timing for me, it came quite the right time because I was about to start a new book. So I thought, you know, I don't really have. I think it almost felt like back in March when lockdown over here happened in the UK. It was kind of I have a choice. I could just really throw myself into a new project now and try and ignore or not ignore, but try and focus my energies on my internal world and my work. Yeah. Which is what I did. So yeah, so I'm kind of I hesitate to say this, but I'm touching wood. But I'm sort of 4/5 of the way through a new book, the first draft of a new book. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. So yeah, I'm juggling these different plates are spinning. There's the promotion side of things and the gearing up for publication and to share final cut with the world, which I'm really excited about. And then there's but backstage there's also you know, a new project, so that's really good. Wow.
Now in the beginning when kind of lockdown happened, a lot of people kind of sprinted a bit with their creativity. They're like, oh, I have to take advantage of this, and then I found that things kind of slowed down a bit, and then everybody was coming to terms with, you know, being slightly isolated from everybody and kind of thinking, oh well, what if I don't create something? Do you find, because writing is so solitary anyway, do you find that helps you in a way to kind of have no distractions? You don't have to go out anywhere. You don't have to make kind of plans to do anything. You can actually focus on something creative.
Yeah. Yes, mostly. I mean, I remind myself every day how lucky I am during this, because actually my work is unaffected, and if anything, it's affected in a positive way, as you say, because I'm less distracted. I don't have meetings. I'm not on a book tour at the moment, you know, which is, you know, a shame, because I do love getting out there and meeting my readers and meeting the audience, but it is time consuming. So I'm very lucky, but at the same time, I think. I mean, I can't speak for other authors, but certainly for me, I can tend to go too far within myself if I'm not careful. I mean, that's partly, you mentioned the photography, and that's partly what that's about. I do street photography, as you may know, and that means that's going out on the street and observing people and being close to people, and that's what I haven't been able to do lately. And also I'll go and sit in coffee shops and take notes and just observe people, which is again something that is only just coming back now. So that aspect of it has been more difficult. It's that being able to have that balance between the external world and the creative kind of fictional world that I'm trying to build. It's been hard to get that balance right, but actually, in terms of the work, it's kind of been quite interesting not having those distractions. We have a special guest, which is my dog, who's just decided she's going to bark. So that's what that is.
Guest appearance.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So what's interesting, when you said you observe people, I was going to ask about, you know, every author at some point has that, you know, the seed, the moment, the aha moment,
yeah,
right, that brings you into developing a story. So with, you know, with Before I Go to Sleep, and then with Second Life, and now with A Final Cut, does that moment change now as you progress in your career, or does that seed of a moment, does that happen? Do you have a routine where you kind of get that?
The kind of idea. I don't have a routine. I think I'm learning to trust the process a lot more with each book, the process of having ideas and building stories and building projects like that. I think it was interesting because Before I Go to Sleep was a definite aha moment. And that was the only time as well I was kind of actively searching for an idea. He never normally does this.
Oh.
That was the only time when I was actively searching for an idea, because I just started a course at the Faber Academy in London, and I wanted to be working on a new project, so I needed to come up with a new project. So I was reading lots and sort of, I suppose, going into the world with an open mind about what I might want to write about.
Yeah.
one of the things that I did was I read an obituary of a man who suffered from hearing. Sorry, going back into my old job now. Suffered from memory loss as a result of an operation he'd had as a 20-something-year-old. And that kind of sparked the idea of before I go to sleep and invest and sort of talking about memory and things like that. But with the other two books, with Second Life and also with Final Cut, it was a much more kind of gradual process. I knew the kind of, as I'd been coming towards the end of the preceding book, I'd begun to get an idea of what kind of world I wanted to talk about and write about and sort of be in. I'm going to put her out. Will you excuse me for 1 second?
Oh, of course. You know what I find really interesting about, you know, how you can, you know, with the first book, like having journal. No, I was just saying to Marissa, it's really, you know, just reading an obituary. Sorry, just back to that's wild for you to kind of then develop that into a story and kind of then the characters come in. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, it was instant pretty much. I mean, and it was quite interesting because I read the obituary and I instantly saw Nicole Kidman. No, but I instantly saw a female character, a woman, you know, a female character. I saw the opening of the book, the opening scene of the book, pretty much. So that was a very kind of light bulb moment. And I think to an extent, I kind of almost expected that to happen with every project. Yeah. And it doesn't. It doesn't for me, you know. I think I've kind of learned that when that kind of thing does happen, you should go with it because it's yours. I mean, clearly there was a reason why that particular person's obituary, because it wasn't the only obituary I read, but there was a reason why that particular story, it's gelled, obviously it connected with something that my subconscious wanted to explore and wanted to think about and to talk about. Yeah. So I think when that does happen, you know, you're better off going with it. You have to really. The other two, it was more of a gradual thing though. It was more, I always think the best ideas are kind of magnetic. It's sort of, you'll write it in your notebook or whatever and maybe don't even think that much of it, but then another idea will come and that'll go and you think, oh, actually that goes with that and this goes with this, and then it sort of gets bigger and bigger. So that's kind of how it happened with the other two. And I mean, you know, I'm not going to pretend that before I go to sleep arrived fully formed in my head from the muses delivered it as a package and then I just had to write it out. I mean, it was just the germ of the idea. Yeah. But from that I span out, you know, into the world of the book. So yeah, it was very interesting.
Do you plot, or would you rather, like the way you write, because obviously some authors just don't at all and just kind of write as it comes. Do you do that, or would you really like to set out what you kind of see it?
It's changing with each book, actually. Every book I've done has become more plotted, right, and less pantsed, they call it, don't they? No, before I go to sleep, it was strange because I wrote most of the first draft on a course I was doing, and that course started in early February, I think it was, and the idea came to me sort of 2 weeks beforehand. I mean, it was really kind of, you know, I had 2 weeks to get going, and I wanted to sort of start with a bit of the book under my belt on the opening night of the course, so I felt I was slightly ahead of myself. So I didn't spend months, weeks even, thinking about the characters and deciding, you know, what they had for breakfast and what school they went to and what their family situation was. I think subconsciously I probably did know all of that stuff, but I didn't consciously sit down and think about all of that. And I knew the end, actually. So the beginning came first when I read this obituary, and then a few days, I think, or maybe a week or so later, I knew the end, which I'm not going to spoil for anybody who may not have read it, but not the end of the book, but the truth, you know, the twist. Mm-hmm. The twist came to me. And so then it was a case of like, oh, that would be really interesting if I could make that work. And if I could do it in the first person, that would be even more interesting, but that would be a really hard thing to pull off. So I think in a way I was almost more grappling with the technical aspects of how I was going to do it, that the story just kind of evolved organically. I mean, I'm not going to pretend it was easy. Yeah. I mean, doing it like that, making it up as you go along, for want of a better way of putting it, has its kind of advantages in some ways, because I think you're letting some kind of subconscious thing happen that maybe you would exclude if you were too rigid about a plan. I think also it does mean that, and certainly I kind of ended up writing long passages and scenes and chapters, even, you know, thousands of words that I then would realize actually this doesn't belong in the book. I think that's the problem of not being a plotter.
Yeah.
Is that you can take a wrong turn and end up in a place that actually you're stuck and you can't really get out of. I think especially with the kind of novels that I write, those sort of psychological thrillers that are quite intricately plotted.
I was going to say, because the two things that I find first, like, really tricky. First person is just really difficult for me to write in. It's always been third person, unless if I attempt nonfiction, obviously. But fiction for me, like when I did, I think my 6th draft of my my book as it was going, I was like, I'm gonna just rewrite it all in first person.
Yeah.
You know, just to try it, and it's really difficult. The other thing, though, why psychological thriller? Why would you? I mean, because that you could so easily paint yourself into a corner. How do you navigate that?
Well, it's funny because I probably shouldn't admit this, but I didn't really realize I was writing a psychological thriller until my agent told me. I mean, I'm kind of half joking. But I wasn't sort of. I didn't sit down to write one.
Yeah.
Which I think is possibly why back then, and it's nearly 10 years old now. You know, back then I think when it came out, it was quite unusual. And I think that's because I didn't sort of think, well, this is how you write a psychological thriller. This is kind of, you know, it was more that I wanted to write a story first and foremost, and I wanted to explore memory and identity and all of those kind of issues, which still to this day, I mean, they're in the new book as well. They still fascinate me. Yeah. But I've always also, I mean, when I look back now on my reading and the writing I did before I wrote Before I Go to Sleep, I realize it's, of course I was going to write a psychological thriller because that's the sort of stuff I've always been reading and always been interested in. Yeah. And, you know, so there was always going to be a crime of some description in there. I think there was always going to be something shocking or something dark. But I didn't sort of have a formula in my head or even really an idea of, I mean, I remember when my agent first read it, yeah, that's one of the first things she ever said to me. She said, "You do know it's a psychological thriller, don't you?" Because I mean, I think what I'd done is I delivered a not particularly good one in some ways. A lot of the editing process that I went through with Before I Go to Sleep after the first draft that I showed my agent, which of course wasn't the actual first draft, because you know, but after that draft, the work that we did together was me really sort of, now I knew what it was and what it could be. The question then became, well, okay, what works in the context of what it is, if that makes sense. Yeah. What actually is slowing down the narrative or is not really psychologically thrilling enough. Yeah. You know, so that was the sort of process there.
And I think, you know, because you started that, there is such a great, obviously, consistency with all of your books where the characters really explore themselves to a forensic degree. And I think that to me, there is the psychological thriller isn't, the way you write isn't just for the shock value. Yeah. There's something quite profound in how they explore themselves. And I think that's probably, obviously you're going to stick to it if your first book kind of made you go, oh, that's actually quite fascinating, I'm just going to keep going, obviously. Yeah.
Although I don't know that I could write any other way, really. I think because it is what really fascinates me. Yeah. You know, in all of the books, I think, to a greater or lesser extent, even the so-called bad guys, the evil people, I still need to try and understand. To me, they're not. They're just they're complicated people who've screwed up.
Yeah.
To some extent or not. I can't really just, you know, they're just like, why someone has done that thing has also always fascinated me. And I think it's, you know, it's this whole kind of thing about, is someone evil or bad, or do they do evil and bad things?
Yeah, it depends on the perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. But I've always been the same. I've always been the kind of person who, you know, I want to do all the psychological questionnaires to find out what, you know, Disney character I am and all that kind of stuff. So, to me, it's all part of the same kind of fascination with psychology, I suppose.
Now, so when you hear the voices of your characters in your head, explain to me why you decided on SJ instead of Steve Watson, because that's connected, isn't it?
Yeah. The truthful answer is, well, it's a combination of things, really. That I never wanted to be Steve Watson on my book jacket. As soon as the chance. Well, actually, no, I'm lying. I was going to say as soon as it started to look like a possibility that I would have my name on a book jacket. But actually, no, when I was fantasizing about it at the age of 8 years old, I think I still probably didn't want to be Steve Watson.
Oh.
I mean, I don't know why that is, really. I don't know. That probably says a lot about me as a person. That I didn't want my own.
Like one of the psychology tests.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting because I remember when I'm naturally quite a shy person, or I don't know if that's even true anymore, but it certainly was when the book first came out. I mean, I think that's the deep. I often joke it's the kind of one of the deep ironies of my life is that I decided I would do a job in which I could spend, you know, all of this time, however many hours a day, in a room with imaginary people and not really have to talk to real people. And then it kind of backfired spectacularly when I'm out there on a book tour talking to an audience and doing stuff like this. I mean, I'm joking really, because I do actually quite enjoy it, but I think there is still an element of truth in that. But I do remember in the early days when I had to go and do something which was really outside my comfort zone. So I would you know, go and do a talk or a book event when I was on stage, you know, or something like that, or be on TV, for goodness sake. I do remember I would actually, this might sound slightly crazy, but I would actually, on the way there, on the way into the room or wherever, I would say to myself, you know, you're not Steve, you're SJ Watson. You're not. It was almost a psychological kind of distinction I had to make of becoming this other person. But the reason it was SJ was, yeah, it was partly so. But so I kind of wanted that, and I would sort of, I'd been thinking about other names, and my middle name is John, so I was thinking, oh, could I be, you know, John Watson, or could Jack Watson, or something like that, or maybe I should go, you know. I was thinking about, you know, DBC Pierre, for example, whose name is basically a nickname. And I was thinking, well, I had nicknames at school, but none that I would want on the book jacket. Fairly insulting. But you know, my agent, who is a genius, I remember we had a conversation, and she said, are you very attached to your name, darling? And I was like, well, I am, yeah, but I think I know what you're getting at, and in that context, no, I'm not. And she suggested that we go for, she said, in fact, she said, have you got a middle initial? Because, and I said, yeah, it's John. She said, well, and I was like, yeah, that's great, because the book is written from a woman's point of view. I mean, as you were kind of hinting at in your question, and it was never my decision. It was never a desire to kind of hide the fact that I was a man writing that. Because I mean, if it was, I wouldn't be doing stuff like this. I wouldn't have had my photo. You know, I wasn't hiding it. But especially, I remember when we sent the book out, when Claire sent the book out to the publishers on submission to see, and a lot of people got in touch with her and said, what's she like to work with, and has she written anything else?
Interesting.
And there was one, I can't remember who, but there was one in particular who demanded to see my photograph because they didn't believe Claire when she said, actually, it's a guy who's written it. And that was really reassuring to me, because I thought that with this book, I did think, I mean, as I was writing it, it never felt like a particularly brave thing to be doing, to writing from a female point of view, from a woman's point of view. But I did afterwards realize that once I thought, oh, you know, this is actually going to get into the hands of readers who I'm not related to. Yeah. I did sort of think, actually, the whole book doesn't work if you read it and you think, well, a woman would never think like this, would never say this, would never feel this. It had to feel authentic in that voice. And so it was very reassuring to me when people said, you know, what's she like?
Mm-hmm.
It made me think.
There are so many instances where male authors very unsuccessfully write what they think women would say and do. And it's, I mean, people talk about it all the time. So not only, you know, is that really successful, that voice, but I think you're right. You know, the SJ gives a level of ambiguity to the author that probably allows for more room to kind of occupy different spaces. Yeah,
exactly that. And I think it's quite interesting actually, because I in a way I sort of thought, and maybe this is a sign of my naivety, but I sort of thought by using my initials it would mean that people wouldn't talk about it. But actually, you know, that's fine. You know, that's fine. It's funny because I still don't really think of it as being a particularly interesting thing on the one level, because for me, the challenges in Before I Go to Sleep, for example, were writing from the point of view of someone who had no memory, and and in Second Life, the challenge was writing from the point of view of someone who's a recovering addict who's dealing with grief. You know, and in the new one, the challenges are not about the fact that it happens to be a woman who's going through these things, for me anyway. But I do think people are still kind of hung up on gender, you know, and still, I don't know, still kind of think, oh, it's what's such an odd, strange, weird thing to do.
Sure. Yeah, where there should be more focus on the voice and the character. And I think you know, all of these characters, whether they're a man or a woman, could be either in your stories. I think they both come at it from their experiences are very human, ultimately, you know. Yeah. And I think, I don't know, I think I'm behind all that, there is also, I have always been fascinated by, you know, women's the specific challenges that women face. I've always, you know, I would consider myself to be a feminist. I don't know whether that's something that I'm allowed to consider myself to be, or other people have to tell me I am, but I'm certainly a supporter of feminism, put it like that. And so, you know, I'm constantly kind of interested in the challenges that my female friends, for example, have that my male friends just don't. You know, what to wear on a night out, whether to get the Uber home, whether that's going to be safe or not, you know. That's always been something that I've kind of thought about and been fascinated by. Makes it sound a bit like you know, but I've always thought about that kind of thing. I mean, I think certainly, especially Before I Go to Sleep, I think it would have been a very different book if I'd written it from a male point of view. Yeah. Because a lot of it's about power and the power that this guy has over his wife. Yeah. I mean, you know, and I think because like you said in the beginning, you're fascinated with human stories and you're fascinated by watching people and looking at their body language. And I think that level of observation kind of lends itself to how your characters speak and act in books, because, you know, and that's, you know, your photography, that's probably why the both kind of sides of your life marry each other quite well. So it's always kind of, people are under a lens. Yeah, it's interesting because the photography is a new thing. I've been interested in photography for a long time, but it's only in the last maybe 2 years that I've gone out and actually taken photographs, and it's only really been while I've been writing Final Cut, and it was really a revelatory, because I just found each thing kind of fed the other. So, which I think is like what you're saying about they're both, but you know, both putting people and things under a lens and examining stuff. But you know, I would find that I could do a few hours at my desk writing, and then I would go and take a few hours taking photographs, and come back. Each would energize the other thing. So yeah, it's been a kind of interesting. Right. I've taught you here off from the creative side, right? I'm going to hand you over to Marissa, who's going to kind of get all the nitty gritty out now. Okay. She always calls the boring questions, but I disagree.
Although with you, see, I had a hard time kind of just focusing on industry stuff because I think so much of your writing and the, you know, you as a writer is really interesting. I read something from you in an interview actually on your agent's website that I just loved, which was that you said you're far better off confusing the reader than boring them.
I wish I'd come up with that. It was actually Mark Billingham who said that, and I'd stole it. But I think it's good advice for someone, in the opening pages of a book.
You know, and I thought that it just resonated with me because it just seemed like some of the best, you know, like most frank advice that I'd read in terms of getting noticed. Because, you know, as a writer, leaving something to the imagination has to take extreme restraint. And you know, but it's key to hooking people in, you know, from your agent to your editor, to your publicist, to the sales team, to the people, you know, the buyers at the supermarkets, to the end reader. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, about how you, in which you alluded to before, sort of how you pare things down, how you have that self-restraint.
Well, I think it's something I've had to learn. I mean, and I think because I do some mentoring and you know, so I'll occasionally read unpublished and aspiring writers' work, and I think it's often the thing that's most obvious is that it's about trusting the reader. It's about you don't have to spell everything out, and actually by leaving stuff out, you know, obviously you need to give them something to go on. But one of the beauties, I think, of reading is actually, you know, when you watch a film, well, when you read a book, compared to watching a film, when you read a book, you're the set designer, you're the costume designer, you're the dialect coach, you know, you're the makeup artist. You can imagine everything about this scene. And so I think the more that you pin things down by describing exactly what's going on, not only does it get really boring, but actually, you're denying the reader the opportunity to imagine the hotel room they've just woken up in, or the color of your main character's hair, or whatever it might be. Obviously, if it's important for the story. So, I mean, you know, it's that thing that if someone's reading the opening page of a book, because we all know that's the kind of the most important thing in many ways. Somebody will read on as long as you've presented them with a vaguely exciting and interesting scenario or question. Somebody will read on if they're thinking, I don't really know what's going on here, but it sounds like it's something interesting, you know, or it feels like it's something interesting. Somebody will read on. But if someone is like, oh, I do not need to know, we're 3 paragraphs in and you know, nothing's happened, then I'll put the book down and move on. So I think it's that kind of, it is about trust. It's about the reader. You're taking the reader on a journey, and you're the guide and the navigator, and whatever, how you want to think about it. But actually, you haven't got to, you know, you can trust them to get what you're talking about without spelling it out.
Right.
Yeah.
So we often, Tetyana and I, talk about, you know, in some of the previous episodes that we've done, what compels people to talk about a book after they've read it, right? And that's such a part of what tends to make a successful novel, right? Is that when people just feel like they have to talk to someone about it. So do you think that for, you know, before I go to sleep, it was the fear, right, that this was something that could really happen to people? But I like to think that if I woke up and I didn't know what was going on, but I saw my husband, I'd be like, all right, good job. Like,
well, that's good.
So, like, that would be really stressful.
Yeah.
I was wondering, do you think that people really put themselves in that position, and that was kind of what, you know, fueled that?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, it's interesting because people will quite often say to me, and it's a really scary book, and I'm like, was it? To me, maybe it's because I was kind of, you know, backstage and putting it all together, and, you know, that I've lost sight of that. But, you know, maybe, yeah. I mean, I think we've all kind of experienced it to an extent. I mean, I remember after it came out, obviously, and I'd been on a book tour in the States. And I just moved house, so I was in a new flat, and so I'd spent, I don't know, I think it was probably a 10-day 2-week tour. So I'd spent that amount of time sleeping in different hotel rooms, and, you know, waking up every day thinking, oh, where am I? And then, oh, okay, I'm in Houston or wherever it was. Listen to me. Anyway, but, you know, and then I flew home, and I was in a new flat, well, I just moved into this flat, and I remember, because I was jet lagged, I fell asleep on the sofa, and it was a proper deep sleep. You know, it wasn't just a doze. I was properly asleep for hours. And when I woke up, I had that kind of groggy feeling, and I opened my eyes and I looked around the room and I thought, I don't know where I am. And that, you know, that's something that happens quite often. You know, but usually it's not very, you know, a second, 2 seconds, maybe later, of course I'm at home or I'm on a book tour, and it wouldn't come. I couldn't work it out, because I knew I wasn't on the book tour anymore, because I remembered flying home. But I thought, but this isn't home, because, you know, and that was really, really scary. And although that was after the book, you know, it was after I'd written Before I Go to Sleep, so I hadn't experienced it beforehand. I realized then, I think, how terrifying it must be, because, you know, the other thing to remember, of course, is it's not just one character in a fiction, in a novel, that has experienced this. This is something that which actually people who suffer from mental you know, disorders, memory and Alzheimer's or whatever, do experience. You know, real people suffer these kind of problems and conditions, maybe perhaps in most cases not as extreme, perhaps, but they, you know, it's a real thing. And it must be just terrifying to wake up and just not know who you are, and not know where you are, and not know why you're where you are.
Yeah.
I don't know, if I can't remember if I've answered your question, but yeah, I think that may be one of the things that people do. I think it's the books I love, probably like most people, you know, they are the ones that you close it and you think, I need to talk to somebody about that, you know. And it's good if it's for a good reason, because you want to talk about how great it was, or how you disagreed with this, or didn't like that but like this, you know. It's not great if it's, I hated the ending, and, you know. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what it is. It's that sort of, there is more to it. I'm very sort of, I do like stories, and not all of my readers do like this, but I do like stories that kind of live on after the final page. You get a sense of your journey with these characters has ended, but their journey is continuing, their story is continuing. And especially in Before I Go to Sleep, that was very much what I wanted to do.
Can I add to Marissa's question? When you knew that was what people twigged on, like that, like there was so much excitement about the premise, when that train started going, are these kind of things that people brought up when they optioned it for a movie? Was that the kind of thing where people like, okay, this is going to be big because it is scary, that idea, that, you know, is that kind of, or?
Not really, no. I mean, nobody really talked about, I don't remember anybody really talking about the kind of scariness of it. I think it was people, the premise, I think, you know, it was one of those, you know, examples of what, again, another term I didn't really know, but a high concept novel. You know, you could describe it in I think one of the reasons it did become as popular and as successful as it did was because it could be described really quite easily. It was, it's that book about the woman with no memory, you know. That wasn't a kind of deliberate thing, but actually I think it really helped the book.
Yeah.
And I think maybe there was something, yes, I mean, I think there was something about the fact that it was a scary book, it was a crime novel, it was a thriller, it had you on the edge of its seat, but it wasn't, and I'm not in any way dismissing these books, because some of them are great, and I'm, you know, but it wasn't a guy running around in a ski mask chopping people up. It wasn't, you know, it was something slightly, yeah, maybe there was something about the fact it was a bit more ordinary.
But
it was a bit more domestic.
Yeah, the subtlety in that ordinariness.
Yeah.
You know, that something could then turn like that. And you, oh my God. That's, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it could happen to anyone in a way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Marissa, keep going.
So you set out to write, right? You did not set out to make a movie necessarily.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, can you talk a little bit about how that happened? The order of operations there?
Yeah, that was the movie was completely. It was a completely surreal experience, because you know, when I started the course, my goal was to become, well, okay, it was to become a better writer, but it was, you know, I wanted to have a book published. That was my, you know, I didn't necessarily think it would ever happen, because, you know, there's a general perception that it's incredibly difficult to get a book published. But that was my goal. the thought that it could become a movie, literally, I mean, it entered my head in terms of a fantasy, like, you know, winning the lottery may enter your head, but actually you don't really expect to do it. But I remember I used to work in the health service, and I was at lunch, and this was before, so we edited the book and it had gone out on submission. And I think we had a German publisher by this point, and perhaps I think there were several UK publishers that were interested, but we hadn't even sold the rights to publish it in English then, and it hadn't gone out on submission for film or TV at all. So I was at work I was in my lunch break, and I was checking my personal emails. And I got an email, and it was from a name I didn't recognize, and it was kind of at Scott Free Productions or something, I can't quite remember. And the subject was Before I Go to Sleep movie. And I really did think one of my friends was winding me up here, you know. and actually, when I opened it, and it looked authentic, but it was, you know, I kind of, you know, what it's like, you skim read an email, and I saw the words movie and brilliant film and director and Ridley Scott, and I was like, what? This is kind of crazy. And it kind of, and you know, when I read it in more detail, it was sort of, and Ridley's in town working on one of his movies, obviously, and he'd love to meet you. And I was like, this is just, you know, this is mad. But it turned out, you know, so I rang Claire, my agent, and she was, I know that's genuine. We don't know how, I remember saying, we don't know how they've got hold of it, but they have. Because at this point it existed on my laptop, and there were a few printed copies obviously floating around various editors' offices around the world, I suppose. And, but yeah, it wasn't supposed to be with anyone on the TV or film production side. So yeah, it was mental. But it was interesting because it was something I'd never imagined, I didn't allow myself to get excited about it.
Of course, yeah.
And also part of the course that we'd done, we'd had people from the film world come and talk to us, and they'd sort of they told interesting stories about films that had nearly happened and then hadn't. They'd fallen apart at the last minute. You know, even to the point there was one in particular that, you know, that $1 million sets had been built, and huge Hollywood actors were on board and signed up, and contracts were signed, and the film was in the camera and everything was ready to go, and then it had just at the last minute some piece of funding had been pulled and something had fallen away, and then it hadn't happened. And so even I remember I told myself, you know, when Nicole Kidman is there on the set, filming the camera and it's rolling, then I might get excited. I mean, I did get excited before then, obviously, but yeah, it was a kind of surreal experience. It was and it was also, again, it was very reassuring to me, because Rowan Joffe, who directed and directed the film and wrote the screenplay, we had a meeting, and well, first of all, it was quite, I remember he was like, I've had some ideas. I mean, we'd signed nothing at this point. We hadn't even, you know, it was so far from even being a contract exchanged, but he said, I've had some ideas, and he pulled up this huge wad of paperwork, and he was like flicking through it, and I was like, oh my God, he's got more insight at the moment.
Yeah,
he's got more insight into this film than I have. Yeah. But that was very reassuring. But also more than that, I remember he told me the story of his mother, who is an actor, and she'd had, I think, an illness which had caused amnesia, and it wasn't anywhere, I don't think it was anything like as bad as my character's, but he was one of the people that I was slightly anxious might, when I knew the book was going to go out into the world, I was anxious that people would read it and think I was cheapening that sort of medical condition, or that I was using it as a plot line or a twist in a story. Yeah. So it was very, very kind of reassuring when he said he'd read it, and rather than throw it out the window and be disgusted that I'd dared to, you know, talk about amnesia, he'd actually wanted to turn it. He said to me, it's got to be my next project. I want it to be my next project, and that was incredibly, you know, gratifying. Yeah. But yeah, it was interesting, kind of. the whole process was, I just decided as well, because I'd also heard so many stories about authors of novels that had tried to interfere in the film of their book or TV series or whatever, and just screwed it up or had a bad experience. And I thought, I'm just going to step back and let them do their thing, and enjoy it. And that's kind of what I did. You know, I was very lucky because I had a very good relationship with Rowan and with Liza, the producer. So they would share ideas with me and run things past me and check I was okay. But actually, I decided that I was not going to get involved unless it was something that I really disagreed with, which didn't actually happen. And so I just kind of went along on the set and sat there and kind of ate my Monster Munch watching Nicole Kidman, you know.
Yeah, watching
and feeling just bonkers, you know.
It came out of your head, and now these people are reenacting what you've.
Yeah, it was so weird. So I mean, I can't describe it. It's probably one of the weirdest things of the whole very strange journey was especially that first day, because Nicole Kidman looked as well just how I imagined the character in a weird, and I thought, I didn't really think I'd described her in that much in a lot of detail in the book. I think I'd left kind of a lot of it to the imagination of the reader, but she seemed to just get it. And I do remember there was one, because I was there all the time. Liza made the mistake of telling me that I could go on set as often as I wanted. So I was like every morning almost knocking on the door, let me in. But there was one day towards the end of shooting where Nicole Kidman was struggling over a line. And she turned to Rowan and said, it's because she wouldn't say this. I've realized she wouldn't say this. And then she gave her a suggestion for an alternative, and I thought, yeah, she's absolutely right. And the line wasn't from the book that she couldn't. The line that she felt was wrong wasn't actually directly from the book. But I'd read the script and thought, yeah, it hadn't leapt out at me as being not true to the character, but Nicole had seen something and felt something, and I thought that was the kind of moment that I sort of said goodbye to Christine in a way, to that character. That's the moment in which I thought, actually, there's now somebody else who knows her better than me, in a way, or at least as well as me. So that was also a very surreal experience. The whole thing was just, yeah. I mean, it was just like. I remember being on set and sort of, I think I was playing, because I don't know, you know, if you know, but it's actually quite boring on a film set most of the time. There's not a lot happening. There are people fixing lights and I don't know what, but so I was sitting there playing on my phone or something. And then Liza tapped me on the shoulder and said, oh, Steve, can I introduce you to, and I looked up and Nicole Kidman stood there in front of me, looking down on me, in costume and with a wig and everything. And it was so strange, because it was like, here's somebody I invented standing in front of me, looking a bit like Nicole Kidman, who's a Hollywood-winning, you know, an Oscar-winning film actor.
And isn't that amazing validation? Where you think not that you need a movie star and a movie deal to be validated in your work, but also
I do now.
That is is it in your contract now? It's like, I will not write unless it gets turned into a movie.
I don't think we get away with that clause, no.
To be able to kind of, to get something out of your head, it does not exist before, right? Sitting there, you're inventing something, and then if you're lucky enough, it gets turned into an actual living person saying those words.
Yeah, I mean, it's so weird. And it's quite interesting as well, because there was one day on set, I was on set. It was they were filming, I don't know if you've seen the film, but they were filming the bit where it's raining and they're outside the house. And it's a very dramatic moment. And I remember I was there. It was I think it was February, and it was freezing cold in South London, and it was actually raining for real.
Oh.
And so they did this very emotional scene underneath the rain machine, which was kind of dirty water, not glamorous. And they were using the house as makeup and I suppose and costume and stuff, and so wardrobe. And so I'd been doing an interview inside the house, and while they were shooting, and I came out as Nicole Kidman was going in. And so, you know, I'd met when she was towering above me and everything. So I said hello, and we had a bit of a chat. And I remember I said to her, because she looked, makeup running down her face, the hair bedraggled, just wrapped in a towel, shivering. And I said to her, oh, for the record, I said, this scene in the book, it takes place inside the living room by a cozy roaring log fire. And she looked at me and she said, and she wasn't being cruel or dismissive, I don't think, but she just said, yeah, but this is more dramatic, isn't it? And I thought, oh God, you're absolutely right. So now when I write, there is a part of me that thinks, actually, I'm not thinking in terms of it, this could be a film, as in I'm not writing it because I want it to be a film, although it's great if that happens, Yeah. But I am thinking, is there a way I can even inject more drama into this scene by not setting it by a roaring log fire? Maybe it should be somewhere a bit more, so that taught me a lot actually about how to try and wring every drop of drama out of a scene or make a scene resonate in a better way. So yeah, it did teach me a lot.
That's I enjoyed every single bit of that answer. I know that's a ridiculous thing to say, but I just really.
That's good, because I feel like I'm not letting you two talk at all.
No. But this is where we're kind of representing so many people that want to know the process and the behind the scenes. So it's, that was great. It's like a nice piece of chocolate, just getting a little bits.
I think it's also I've been in lockdown for not 6 months. It feels like it, but I'm talking. I can talk to people.
It's like adult interaction. Yeah.
So speaking of, I am curious about how you and your publisher have adapted and planned for the release of Final Cut.
Yeah.
And what the restrictions we're all under.
Yeah, it's very different. Everything is virtual now, and that's an interesting landscape. I think everyone's kind of feeling their way through it. Mm-hmm. I think this is the second event I've done sitting in this chair in this room, kind of, so it's a different experience, because I think, as I said earlier, I love the part of the process. I do love the process of publishing as opposed to writing. It is going out and meeting people, because you do spend such a long time sat in your room by yourself, typing away at a keyboard or whatever. And so it is nice to actually, and who doesn't love it when someone comes up to you and says, I really loved your book. It's really nice. I'm not going to pretend that I know I will never take that for granted. And so it's that's the one aspect of, I think I'm quite surprised at how much I've enjoyed doing the 2 now events I've done in this kind of situation. I did an event a few weeks ago for a festival called Locked Up, which is a kind of online crime writing festival, which is really good fun. And I watched a lot of the other authors as well, and it was really fun to watch. It was surprisingly, it felt like a good experience. So I think actually one good thing that may come out of the current situation is that actually there are more opportunities to sort of do this sort of stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
But I do think it's weird, it's strange putting a book out into the world where, I'm not going to be going out and sort of like seeing it, if that makes sense. Sort of, there's going to be a launch party, but it's going to be a Zoom launch party, which again it's going to be nice, I'm sure. But it's not going to be the same as sort of, celebrating it in that kind of way. So everyone is having to readjust to a different way of working and a different way of living, aren't they? So at the moment, we'll just have to see. Yeah,
I think one of the major things that I've always worked on in my career is tools for getting connecting authors and audiences, in different ways. And my hope from this, of course, is just that people get more comfortable with different technologies that allow them to connect with more people who they can't always be there in person with. So
yeah, of course, that's the other thing. There may be lots of people out there who wouldn't get on public transport or drive to a book event. Who wouldn't or can't, but actually can do this kind of thing and can. So there is also, it's a positive too. It can be seen as an opportunity to get stories in front of more people, which I think is why we're all really doing this. You know, it's about sharing narrative and sharing stories. So yeah.
Absolutely. So we're gonna get into the hard-hitting questions now.
Oh no. Quick fire round.
Before we ask you the final questions, I'm wondering, and I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, will there, or do you hope for there to be any more movie adaptations?
The first part of the question, will there? Not as yet. Nothing is in the pipeline. But I would like. I mean, the new book, Final Cut. I am not as I was writing it, but I do. I look at it now and think. I think it would make a really good 2 or 3 part TV series. So that would be really. I mean, if that was to happen, that would be really exciting, because I think, interestingly, TV is having a really, really exciting renaissance at the moment. You know.
Yeah, it's a really fun format, and I think a lot now, you know, things are being released because it's bite size. It gives people the opportunity to kind of dip in and out. Yeah.
One of the things that I miss most about living in England, I think, is the okayness with making a few part series. We just beat everything to death here. That's it. Just goes on and goes on.
I never really noticed that, but yeah, everything is like 10 or 12. Yeah, I do think there is something about when I click on, you know, Netflix or whatever, and it's something is 10 episodes long. I think, oh, that's quite an undertaking. Whereas if it's 3 or 4, I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be really exciting if that was to happen.
Yeah.
But you know, who knows?
Following.
Right. So my first question for the last kind of few questions is, and I might know the answer to this, but if you could do anything else other than what you're doing, anything, what would you do for work?
I would probably want to be a therapist.
Oh, I was not.
It would be a very good one, but I think because I love psychology and that kind of stuff, that I think probably that, yeah, I would want to be a therapist.
Oh, well, we should have another session where we could tell you all of our problems.
So is there something that you could share about yourself or your writing process, right, that people might be surprised to know? Something.
Oh God. Oh.
Trivia.
True. I don't know. Can we come back to that one? Trivia writing process. Everything. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I've written the new book by hand. I mean, is that interesting?
By hand.
Yeah, as in a notebook, long hand.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Carpal tunnel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but God, that's an undertaking. I don't think many people do that, do they?
A few do, actually. Yeah, I was. And it's a different process. I mean, I know Margaret Atwood does, and Patrick Gale does, because he shares pages of his notebooks on Twitter. But I've got really into pens. I mean, you know, it makes sense. That's what I do for a living. But I keep buying fountain pens at the moment, different inks and blotting paper, and yeah, I've got they're all over. I'm surrounded by them. So yeah. Maybe that's the trivia. My new thing is every morning just opening my case of pens and choosing which one I'm going to use that day.
I like that. That's good. So this one has been historically the hardest question because it takes a while for people to answer. But what is your desert island book? You are only allowed to choose one.
Well, I actually answered this question quite recently because I did something for Dead Good, are they called? So I do know the answer, and I said Rebecca.
Oh.
I think I probably still would stick with it, actually. I mean, it's not very long, so that would be I might choose a longer book. But I still think Rebecca is kind of, for me, that's a kind of blueprint of a book that, it's a psychological thriller. I mean, yes, it's a classic, and yes, it's kind of packaged as a classic, as it should be, but it's basically a psychological. It's a crime novel. It's a psychological thriller. I do love it, and I actually read it fairly later on in my life. I didn't read it until I was, I don't know. It's been within the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, this is the blueprint of what I want to do. So yeah, I think it would be Rebecca.
that probably made an impact. But also, that's probably something that you could always go back to and find new
Mm.
to kind of learn from and go, oh, I didn't see it this way, or especially with psychological thrillers, probably.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it is the perfect mix of really beautifully written, but also a really good story. You know, I think it really shows that you don't have to choose story or characters. You know, you can have it all. You know, so
yeah.
I'll say Rebecca.
Great answer. Thank you, Steve, so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's been really lovely, honestly. And I think, you know, we always hope and you know, that an author comes on here and just kind of gives us more of kind of who they are and how they write and kind of what their experiences have been in the book world. So this has been so lovely.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. That was great. Do you know, I think that was the first time I think I've been, well, it is the first time that we've been led into like a very intricate process of going from somebody sitting and writing a book to then not only having a career at it, but having it explode onto the scene and just make such a difference, you know, with kind of how people digest books, especially kind of psychological thrillers, because sometimes they can be so dense, you know, heavy in a sense, you know. So I think, you know, this is so exciting. What did you think?
That's great.
I'm
just like,
I know it's because of the generosity and the transparency, and I think just everybody craves more and more of that. So yeah, I think yeah. So thank you so much to everybody who has joined in today. It's been lovely having you here. And remember that we are on every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. So please remember to click on the link to subscribe and be alerted ahead of every episode. And thanks for being here.
See you next week.